So in our previous class, we have looked into building post requests and get APIs and post APIs with FastAPI. So this time we have seen the post APIs will accept objects like this. This we have seen two different ways to submit information. One is through the JSON body, which will be passed into this API through this objects format. So we inherited from base model, and from there it works. So another form of submission is through the form data, which we have seen in the survey application. Let me start the server and we'll go from there. Fast API server.py. And we have seen this JSON mechanism of posting data, and then we have created a form, sample form, to submit the data, and we kind of refined it to go into a better CSS. So once we have this information submitted, if I inspect it and go to the network tab, see if what requests are going. So there is a survey post request has gone with the payload as form data here. So this accepting this form data is done through similar mechanism that we used for post. When we do post here, the data goes in the JSON format like this. Request payload goes in JSON format. And whereas in the form, if we submit, it's going to go through this mechanism. So different ways to handle that form data has been discussed. Now let's go in depth into how these request objects can be processed. If not form data, if some raw data is coming, if the request object, all the header information and everything, if we need to read and process that information, how do we do that? Is what we will look into today. So for that, we actually need to import request object from FastAPI. So whenever a browser requests a post request or a get request, we'll get that in that request format. So let's define a handler and accept FastAPI request object from it. Say example API. So in this, I'm going to accept request as a raw request object. This request object has to be imported from FastAPI. So, but this convention is to put this entire imports at the top of the file, but it works either ways. I'm just going to import it here so that it's near our code. So in this API request, basically I have to assign some endpoint to it. So the way to define it is through the annotations or these decorators. This is going to be a post request. Let's say I will say example raw API. Inside this handler, I'm going to get the header information from the request dot headers. I'll just print these headers on the console. And I'm just going to return this headers itself. Return this headers first. Headers request dot headers as a JSON object. Let's see how this looks. Let's go to the docs endpoint. Clear yes. Execute. It has sent the headers as a response. What these headers are, it's actually reading from this API request itself. If we closely observe the headers that we passed, request headers, all this information is passed from the browser. So this information, the server is reading that information and sending it back as a response to the API that we are calling. So this time we will do some more operations. Let's say if I want to handle image uploads or handle some errors, let's implement an advanced API that will handle this. So this one I'm going to rename this API, create a new API. Let's say app.post. Let's say I want to upload an image and want to get the size of that image. Let's figure out where to do it. Size as a function. It's going to accept request. It's a hint to the interpreter or the editor that it is a request object that is coming from FastAPI. So I'm going to read the content request. If we see the request object, it will have a field called content length. I will just go back to the browser and show you what I mean. If you see here, so every request will have a content length in it. So what's the data that we are passing? So our entire payload of the request, how much length in bytes, how much size it has. It has 633. Oh, sorry, this is response header, request headers. If you see the content length, how many bytes are we sending in the body? So we are actually not sending anything here, but if we are uploading an image, we will have some data in it. Let's go back and read that request content length, request.headers. And a foolproof way to get the content or any field from the headers is through the get function. We can pass in what field we want to extract from the headers. Content length is what we need. And if it is not there, a default value, I'm giving 0. And this I'm going to store it in the size attribute. I'm going to convert this into an integer. Now we have the size. If there is no, if size equals 0, then I want to raise an exception, raise an error. You have to give non-zero content. You have to upload something to the API. So here I'm going to raise a HTTP exception, which in turn is from the FastAPI itself. HTTP module, HTTP error, FastAPI HTTP exception. So I'm going to use this and send out an error to the browser with the status as this is actually function status code. I have to give it as http status dot bad request. So you haven't uploaded the file. That is why I'm raising an error here. And we can have some details missing content attention. And a simple way to do this is if size equal to 0, or just I can put if not size. If not size actually checks whether size is 0 or not. If the size is 0, it will be false. So that means not or false will become true, and this gets executed. If size is greater than, let's say I want to have a data not more than 5 MB of data, let's define a maximum length for the data that I want to receive. Max means size, say 5 into 1024, 5 MB I'm keeping. So if the size of the request is more than max mean size, then also we want to show that request. Same thing, raise HTTP exception. This time we want to show a different message. Size cannot exceed 5 MB. Now, okay, we have done the validation. Now we have to actually read the data from the request. If somebody uploads an image, yeah, we need to read that data from the request. So that data will come as request.body. So this request body will have the raw content of data, but we want to process this data into an image and find out the length, and let's just get the size of the data. Return size. So how do we now upload the file, send the file to an HTTP request that we have to see now? So if we refresh this doesn't have any idea of how to upload an image. I can actually have some script written to do the upload. Let's try figuring out with this Postman now. I'll just do upload data post request. I'll do the upload with the post request. Let's do one thing here. I will open my Postman. I'm sharing my Postman link. So this time I'm going to use the URL localhost 8000. This time I'm going to use post request localhost 8000 and then size. In the body, I'm going to send raw data. 1 second. So this binary I'm going to send some image I'm going to upload from my downloads folder. I'm just sending this. Let's go back to the code. Okay. This data actually does not have length property. Let's fix that. Let me go back to the, okay, we are already in the code. Now let's do something here. Instead of data, we will convert this into bytes IO object. This request data object cannot be directly read into length. Let's create a bytes IO object out of this data. So this bytes IO comes from the IO package from IO import bytes IO. Actually, what this data is a buffer object. We need to convert that into bytes object. So this bytes object can have the length, suppose. Let's run it and see. Still has the same error. Bytes object is what? Okay, let's convert this into an image rather than trying to do. I will just use this IO data and convert that into an image. So for this, I'm going to use a package called image. There is a package called image.io in Python. Let's install that. With install, there is something, the image package name is pillow for manipulating image objects. Let's install that. I will import that library from here, from PIL. So this pillow package will give us the PIL library, import image. So this IO object, I'm going to convert this into image of IO. Image dot open, actually, this should be done like this. So this IO is a stream object. So when I converted this data into a stream, so it's an asynchronous way of reading the data from the network. We don't get all the information at once from the request body. So it has to be done through an asynchronous mechanism. So for that, I need to define this as an async. And here, request body, when I'm reading that, I need to make sure that this is waiting on this. That's why we have been getting that error so far. So this time, I'm going to read the data from the request body that I uploaded and convert that into an image. And that image size I'm going to get here. Let's try to get the images width and height. Height has start height. Width I'm going to use here. Let's try now. Let's send it again. Okay, now it's successful. The bytes object, why it did not give earlier, let's figure out. Let's debug and find out. So this time what we did differently is we have added async and await. So let's remove this also. This I'm going to make sure that I'm reading the size of this data. Or else I'll just do type of data. Note that this time I'm not going to use the async function. Okay, I'm using async function. I will remove it and then verify it again one more time. Let's send it, and there is a problem. Object is not iterable. Okay, I think data type. Then there is a keyword called type in Python, so it's not allowing me to use that same name. Object is not iterable. Again, the same issue. I'm just going to use type of data. Yes. Send the request one more time. Let's see the response. It's the type of the data. This is a bytes object. Okay. Bytes object, we should convert that into, okay, if I don't use await, let's see what's the object. It's a coroutine. Okay. So this request body function has returned an asynchronous promise. It's a promise. Coroutine is in Python is in JavaScript we call it as a promise, and in Python we call it as coroutine. So it's actually a asynchronous handler. So we have to wait for the asynchronous coroutine to complete before proceeding with the next operations. So let's do await. So that's why we were not getting on a promised object. We were not getting the actual data. So whenever I'm using await, I still need to use async in the handler function definition. So this data is actually raw bytes of data that is coming from the request. So we can read it into an IO buffer and then read it into the image. And there is a way to convert bytes IO object into a string. We can convert that into a string also, but this time it's not going to work because it's an image object, which is a binary. We cannot convert that into string. So this is how we read raw request from the post data, raw request body from the post data. Not only the form data and JSON data, we have seen now how to read JSON data like this through the post request, how to read form data that is submitted from the browser. And apart from that, we also have the ability to read the raw request headers and also the raw request body. A binary also we can read from the request. So any request that we send, we can either send it in application JSON format or the form data format or any kind of binary format. So all three types of requests can be handled in this way. So we have seen three types. So the same set of operations can be done on put requests and patch requests. So instead of post request here, if I just declare it as put request, it's going to use put. So rest of the things all remain same. It's just the mechanism, which type of verb we can use. It's only a convention rather than a rule to follow these post, put, delete operations. You can do delete operation on a get request also. It's up to the implementation what we do in the server code rather than sticking to the verb that we use. But FastAPI definition allows us to use post request for create and put request for update. So most of the times we will be using post requests only for most of the update operations also. So that's how we build APIs. Now, let's go a little bit into practical implementation of how these things can be applied to a practical use case. Let's say I have a data center or a server which I can start with the APIs. Let's create a new API. It's just going to wrap up all the things that we learned so far into one single API server. So this time I'm going to use enums. Enums is a feature in Python which we haven't looked into yet. So let's use that from enum. Import enum. So enumeration, enum nothing but is an enumeration. Enumeration means it's a collection of predefined data strings. Let's create a class called image that inherits from an enum. So this is a server image, let's say, or I can say OS image. Let's say Ubuntu. I will define Ubuntu as an OS image, which has a string Ubuntu 24.04. I'll use another one, Debian. that will perform. I'll explain what this means and how this works. Alpine 3.20. What this OS image is, it's a enumeration. So enum is also a class in Python. So enums allow us to have predefined set of values to this object. Let's say mm, in an application, let's say we want to allow only a specific set of values to a particular entry. That time we will have to use enums so that we will predefine those values and not allow any other types. It's also a string. A predefined set of strings only is allowed for that field. So in those scenarios, we will use enums. I'll use this enum and then it'll be evident how to use those. Let's create a class called VM that has base model. So it's an object. We are going to receive a request through the VM object from any post request. I'm just giving a name to this. So it's a virtual machine. Let's say this is kind of so what I'm going to write here is the service will start the virtual machines on a remote data center. That is what we are trying to write, a practical application of this. So a client will request for a virtual machine from the data center, giving the image name. So what's the image name I want to bring up my virtual machine in? So what is the virtual machine and all? We can discuss later. So I need a virtual machine with a CPU count as some number. It's an integer. We have already seen that all API requests in every object that we use will have field as an initializer. So what's the validation that we want to use? Greater than 0 and less than 65. Memory size in MB or in GB. That is also an integer. Field greater than 8 GB. Basically, greater than or equal to I can use. And it should be less than something like 1025. These are the parameters that are going to come from the post request. And then image, I'm going to use as OS image. So what this makes sure is that it doesn't allow any other string other than these three strings. Either Ubuntu, Debian, or Alpine. Any of these three are only allowed. If any other thing is passed, it will throw a validation error for us. So this time I'm going to add one more. Now we have defined the data structure that we will receive from the post request, and now I have to write the data post request itself, post request handler. So this time I'm going to use VM start, define a function start VM with the base model VM virtual machine. So I'm going to use a unique identifier, UID4. There is a library called UID4. We haven't installed it. I will import some UID4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. Yeah, this will give a unique string. Let's visit that and see how that works. I can import from UID, import UID 4. Think we have to install VM pip install. From UID, import UID 4. So what this UID will generate is a long string of data. That's a unique, universally unique ID. So in large databases, large data applications, big data applications, we use this UIDs extensively. So for that VM, I'm going to assign a specific ID with the UUID. Now I'm going to start that VM with VMs of ID. Let's define a data structure here. VMs as a dictionary. That's it. Now I'm going to return this ID to as a response. Let's try running this now. Let's go to the browser. So if you see here, it allows only the values that are defined in the enum. Let's just try giving something like 25. Let's see if the server allows it. Start, and the server has automatically given a response. Unprocessable content. Let's try what's the error. Let's figure out. Let's stop and start the server again. Let's use a valid number first and see if things are working, then we will try to break things. Okay, so it was successful, and let's try 25.04, which is not defined in the enumeration, and it threw an error, unprocessable content. And response, and if you see the response, the same response is here, error, unprocessable content. Enum expected one of these three. Input should be one of these three, and input has been given as 25.04. That's the advantage of using enumerations. So even if somebody sends wrong information, we will automatically have this evaluation done by the server if you use enumerations. Okay, so we have seen that. Now let's go to serializing a specific data format. Let's say if I have one object, how do I serialize that? So by default, objects can be serialized uh, if the object has properties, all default properties, data types as integers, floats, or default basic data types of Python. All of them can be serializable. If some object doesn't have that, how do we do that? Dumping of serialization, we will see next. And there is some kind of advanced concept called streaming the responses, which I don't think you need it right now. Once we look into the implementation of UI to current APIs, so 99% of the times you will be using the API mechanism only. So streaming data will not be required. So that's why I'm going to postpone the discussion for further time. Streaming responses need not be done right now. And I think we have mostly covered the basics of REST APIs in FastAPI. I think we should look into Django, and then we will have to implement a UI on top of Django with the HTML basic JavaScript.